time to film this video for, I don't know, 4th or the 5th time now. I've lost count. You see, I'm trying to do this thing where I don't use a script and it's not going well right now. Today I wanted to talk about the Canon FD lenses, which are, strangely enough, the lenses that I shot my last music video on, which I shot last weekend. Gosh, I've been busy. So this is the Canon AE1, and it takes FD lenses. They are a older, I guess you could call them vintage. I don't know if I'd really classify them as vintage, but they're an older lens. So they have characteristics. Now, considering that I own a Canon AE1 with 2 FD lenses, I've got a 135 and I've got a 50mm f1.8? Yeah, f1.8. I thought it would be really interesting to show you guys a comparison between something like this, which is technically a vintage lens, which has a couple of flaws in it and it maybe isn't quite as sharp as modern lenses, and actually showing it against something like the lens that is currently being used right now, the 16-55 Fuji X-mount f2.8. It'll give you some idea about what you can do with these vintage style lenses, what sort of characteristics they can bring, what sort of style you can use them for, because trust me, they're not going to be useful for every single video you make. They are a very specific look, and if you're looking for that look, then yeah, they're a pretty good fit because they are also very budget friendly. All depends on what your project calls for. Now, a few things before we start. I do want to note here that there is a little bit of grain in my images. It is a built-in film grain that is built into the Fuji X-T3, and I just forgot to turn it off because I like it so much, so sorry. It doesn't really affect what we're looking at here. I also want to note the exposure differences between each image. The images coming from the Canon FD lens are a little bit brighter than the ones coming from the Fuji lens. I think that is something to do with the fact that the Fuji lens is a zoom and obviously this one's a prime, so the light transmission might be slightly different. I'm not 100% sure on that, but if anybody has any other idea, leave it down in the comments because hey, I'm not well versed in that sort of thing, but yeah, I don't want to give you guys the wrong information. I have set both the lenses to 2.8 though. Okay, so let's have a look at the differences between these images. So you can see with the Canon FD lens that obviously the fall off is a lot greater than the Fuji lens. There seems to be a lot more fall off on the edges as well. Now this is a thing with vintage glass. The glass isn't as well manufactured as the newer lenses are now, and therefore you can start to see little quirks, especially when it gets to the edge of the glass. It's imperfections really. That's where most of the issues like focus or color aberration, which you can see in this image, you can see both of them in this image, especially up in the top corner here. That's when these things occur. And they mostly occur actually when the lenses are wide open. That's when your lens is at its most vulnerable. So if you want these sort of effects, if you want these sort of characteristics, then you're going to want to have your lens wide open and then compensate for that. If you're not too sure what chromatic aberration is, it's actually the colored edges here that you can see on specifically this flower petal at the top. There's a little bit of a pink line around the edge, like a blurry pink aura almost. That is chromatic aberration. Now, when I'm talking about quality of glass, it doesn't always mean that the lens is vintage. It could actually mean that it's not well made or that it is of a cheaper quality. There are some lenses out there that are very budget friendly and they're good, but when you do have them wide open, you start to see similar problems that you would see with a vintage lens. So obviously, the more expensive the lens, the better the glass quality, the better the image, the sharper the image. Yeah, you get the point. It is an appealing image. I quite like it. I like that shallow depth of field look. I like the softness that it brings. The edges of things aren't quite crisp, even though they are sharp, they're not quite crisp, and I like that, but it does have its place. And yeah, I mean, the Fuji overall on the edges, it looks fairly sharp, well, at least much sharper than the FD lens, and there's a lot more detail in the leaves of this bush here. So I suppose if you wanted something really sharp and digital, or you were focusing on fine details, that would be the one to choose. Next, I wanted to have a look at skin tone, and I wanted to see if having a vintage lens had maybe adjusted skin tones any, or had softened skin tones any. And from what I can see from these images, it did a little bit, because inherently being a vintage lens and the glass not being quite as sharp, there is softness on the edges of anything you shoot. So yes, it did kind of soften everything out. It's kind of like having a very light softening filter like a black Pro Mist or a Pro Mist or anything like that in front of a modern lens, it's a similar effect. But overall, both these images kind of look the same. I don't see many differences between them both, and both of them look quite nice. So what you're doing here by using a vintage lens or even a filter is softening the detail and therefore getting a more flattering, less digital look. Okay, now let's talk about flares, because I don't know, people like flares for some reason. Now you can see here the Canon FD flared up a lot. Now, flares come from the coating on the glass, which helps with light transmission. So if there's certain coatings or no coating on the glass, you can get certain types or certain colored flares. Obviously, it's more desirable not to have a flare, but some people go for that look. So therefore, people use things like anamorphic lenses where they do flare often, or they use uncoated lenses which will flare even more. But yeah, you can see quite a large blue and red flare in the top part of the image of these flowers. And then I did try to replicate that kind of flare in the Fuji lens, and it just didn't work. The lens is, I don't know, too good. You can still see it turns a little bit milky, but not as milky, not as washed out as the FD lens. And in this one, you can also see some chromatic aberration on the petals right there. So you're obviously going to get a lot more of a clinical, a clean look with that Fuji lens compared to the FD. Okay, let's move on to something else that everybody seems to like, and that is bokeh. Now, personally, I am a big fan of odd-shaped bokeh, and the FD lens does not disappoint with that either. So we have some pentagon-shaped bokeh, and then you also have some circular-shaped bokeh on the Fuji lens. Now, the shape of the bokeh is determined by the iris blades. So the more iris blades you've got, the more circular, the more round your bokeh is. Fun little fact, my lower thirds, that little symbol that pops up with my lower thirds, that's actually the iris blades of a standard speed. This is all really subjective though, and you have to keep that in mind. All of these videos on YouTube comparing different lenses, comparing different cameras, it is all subjective. So if you like the look of the characteristics of these FD lenses, maybe give them a go and see if it's something that will fit into your style and what you're after for your project, because they're definitely not going to fit every single type of project. If you're filming something where you can't be pulling focus, like you're filming yourself and you're going to be moving around quite a bit, or maybe you're filming some sort of sporting event or something where you need to nail that sharp focus, I wouldn't recommend using a vintage lens. You probably want to have a look at something with maybe autofocus involved or something newer that is a lot sharper. But also have a think of what you can use these characteristics and these flaws for in what you're doing. Is there a particular style you're going for? If you're going for that vintage look, have a look at vintage lenses, because they'll definitely give you the most bang for your buck. And these being so readily available and quite accessible and cheaper, definitely are good for productions where you need that sort of thing on a budget. So I hope this kind of cleared a few things up about the characteristics of the Canon FD lenses compared to something that is a little bit more modern. It's something that I was looking into when I was doing research for the music video I was just talking about at the start of the video. Once that music video is released, I will make the behind the scenes video and get that out to you. I'll go through some lighting setups and camera moves and what I did with the project. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for almost 2,000 subscribers. I'm sure that'll tick over by the time this video is up, so wow, thank you. I did not expect that many people to be subscribing to me and my horrible Australian accent, but thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the videos, and I hope to be getting them out to you more frequently than what I have been lately. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, please remember to give it a big fat thumbs up, and if you would like to see more of my face, learn a little bit more about filmmaking in the process, remember to subscribe, and I'll see you later.